What a privilege to be here this evening. And what's actually even more fun is I'm not sure I come to the same conclusions as our last wonderful lecture. So with that invitation, and I do admit, because it fit better on the slide, that I adjusted the title slightly. Because prenatal testing has become this routine entity that I'm not convinced, in fact, I think just the opposite is what my witness will show and the data will show. It's become the greatest barrier to postnatal life. So with that, I do not have any financial disclosures. All the parent stories and pictures that you'll hear this evening are with their permission. So presuming this is a wanted pregnancy, we can talk about the surprise not wanted in a different discussion. But at the beginning, our babies, our children embody our hope and excitement for the future. And in an instant, that's taken away into complete, utter despair. What could possibly crush us that badly? Well, many people thought they were just getting gender information and instead found out that there was a suspicion of a prenatal diagnosis. And then they were instantly, not only was that surprise there, they were then offered death because in the United States, as specifically written by ACOG, they say that women's health care, you must offer termination to fulfill that, which as a neonatologist is a tad of an oxymoron. So there is a problem, and we'll illustrate the problem of why I'm saying that the prenatal testing really has become a barrier to postnatal life. And some of it's pretty dark, but hang with me, because there's also a solution. And there's a number of us that are doing this with incredible joy and success already. So how big an issue is this? Congenital malformations and low birth weight really are the leading causes for death in the latest statistics that I have. These are from the US, but when I checked worldwide, we do get some other things from third world countries, but really in the industrialized world, this is what's going on. And the congenital malformations, we're just at the tip of the iceberg because we keep finding new and improved ways, and I use improved a little sarcastically, to find out more and more about our babies earlier and earlier. So what I want to talk about is prenatal testing, what happens after that's said, the traumatized parents, a little bit about perinatal palliative care, and the lethal language that's used almost universally with these folks. And then here's the options. And these are from actual moms that said, I was offered death now or death later, as opposed to the value of life. When did we unlearn that? You would think, as physicians who in various ways have said, we will practice Hippocratic medicine to do no harm, that this would be innate. And yet, that little girl on the end there, she's holding her baby sister who has anencephaly. It's not a monster. Look at the love on her face for her sister. When did we unlearn that and decide that that life was disposable and we would somehow come to someone's aid to offer death sooner than what's already going to happen, as if we should be in charge of that? So, prenatal testing. First, a little story about Aurora. Mom calls her Ro. Ro was diagnosed with Down syndrome at 13 weeks. And as her mom says, a future with challenges, sure, but still a future. At 16 weeks, they met the genetic counselor and the maternal fetal medicine doctor. Quote, that's when the future came crashing down. Due to severe congenital heart disease and high drops, so there was fluid covering her abdomen, it was in her lungs, and significant heart disease, we were told Ro would not survive the pregnancy. Well, she was delivered at 38 weeks, defying all the odds. She stayed in the NICU for 58 days. She had open heart surgery and logged several hospital admissions. Yet Rose's life is not worthless or less value than anyone here today. Today, she is a growing, thriving, smart 3-year-old. Actually, she's now close to 4. She kicks balls and walks like many children, typical of her age. And the future we were never promised wakes up every morning and greets each new day with a smile, says her mom. The truth is, prenatal testing, it's a route to death, and it always has been. In 1956, we discovered in amniotic fluid that there's 46 chromosomes. In 1959, aneuploidies are discovered, and the amazing Dr. Jerome Lejeune discovered that Down syndrome is 3 copies of chromosome 21. He would live to call that genetic racism as he watched people offer death in Iceland remove Down syndrome from actually the entire continent and be proud of it. The first reported amniocentesis was in 1960, but it was done on 2 pregnant women who were hemophilia carriers. And the reason they wanted the information, they would have terminated their pregnancies if they knew they had sons. Now, in 1960, I don't mean to cast aspersions, they didn't have the factor replacement. And as a parent, to watch a child in pain, I'm not saying that this was an easy road, but is our role to offer death when there's something we can't heal? Little public service announcement, trimesters are embryologically meaningless. They came to us out of Roe v. Wade. Actually, 0 to 2 weeks is the pre-embryonic or germinal phase, going on to 3 to 8 weeks embryonic phase of development. Fetal phase, that's from 9 weeks all the way till term. By the end of the embryonic stage, the rudiments of every single organ system are present. And now, and it's not in even little nice divisions of 3. We have the fetal period of development, and then the embryonic, and then the fetal. This is why I get to say I take care of fetal people. My entire job as a neonatologist is to help these little guys transition through their fetal physiology into something that can eat pizza later on. So it is always ironic that it was Roe and lawyers that told us there is somehow more meaning in the baby's life as they get farther along in trimesters, and nothing could be further from the truth. From the moment of sperm-egg fusion, a new person exists. That's not controversial. That's the beginning of life. You didn't exist before, then you do after. With an entire new set of chromosomes that are parts and pieces from your parents, but they're different. It is a different arrangement. It is a brand new human being. So with that, new human being, we're now prenatal screening. We have to be very careful because we've now had the onset of screening versus diagnostic tests. And we don't often pause to explain that to families. The screening test, who is at higher risk, who's more likely to have a problem, as opposed to the diagnostic test, does this person actually have the problem or not? And problematically, I can tell you I've sent home babies from the NICU who were told 100% they will be devastated or dead. We're wrong quite a bit of the time, which is in many ways good news, but a little humility in front of what we don't know would actually go quite a long way. Let me show you what I mean. You can play with it on your phones, not right now. NIPT, if you go to NIPT cell-free DNA screening, there's a predictive calculator. You can choose all kinds of different diagnoses. I happen to put in trisomy 18, and mom is 22 years old. The positive predictive value, the true positive, the fact that the fetus is affected, 14%. So false positive, 86%. That's not what parents hear when they're told, your baby might have this, and then quickly offer determination. I had one mom who actually was in the grocery store line because we can get things through my chart, and was in tears, and the office called her to schedule the abortion before she'd even spoken to a physician. She then apologized profusely that mom had and tried to back out gracefully, but oh my goodness, the trauma that is going on is insane. Here's, if you do this trisomy 18 at 42 years of age, us who had babies as fossils, yes, thank you very much. True positive, it's still only 79%. That's a lot of healthy babies that are offered death, and no one's ever gonna do an autopsy to see if we got the diagnosis right or wrong. Little intimidating. False positives then obviously are 21%. So genetic testing, yes, I have absolutely seen it be an end to a diagnostic odyssey. Our kiddos in the NICU that we don't, what can we do that makes this diagnosis hang together so that we can try to prognosticate or just even not torture this child with more tests? And the genetic testing we have had come in handy. I will also say that it frequently comes back with the lovely words, clinically, how's that going? I'm like, oh, good grief. Meaning they don't know. There's so much we don't know in the rearrangements of the genes. And so they'll say clinical correlation needed. Like, well, if I'm sending it, something's not going right, so thanks. But we don't know what it means. And then there's the Pandora's box into prenatal stuff, where we really step out on a ledge. Where else in medicine do we diagnose people before we've met them, or sight unseen? We haven't had a chance to hold this little one, to look at them and know. If you had a diagnosis of cancer, I've seen people live for 3 days, and I've seen them live for 30 years. I don't believe on the day of diagnosis we say, hi, I could also kill you on Friday. But that's exactly what happens with prenatally before we've even met the human being. Now, I apologize that this is fuzzy. Informed consent is supposed to be nature of treatment, alternatives, any questions, risks, and benefits. There's no bubble for death offered. That's not there. Johnston, this was actually in the New England Journal of Medicine, if you can believe it. She's an obstetrician, and she writes, without robust informed consent, mothers are asked to consider terminating the pregnancy without full understanding of the results. I would challenge us that we don't have a full understanding of the results either, and yet we act like we do. An example of what I call genetic misadventures, and the literature is full of them. I just picked one. A genetic variant was blamed for a little boy who sadly died of SIDS. They thought that it explained that he had long QT syndrome, and so that was the cause of death. Interesting, they tested his asymptomatic brother who was doing just fine, and he had the same rare genetic variant. So what did they do? They actually put a defibrillator in the healthy child. It went off a couple times, not comfortable. Someone finally poked their head up and decided to test the rest of the family. Greater than 20 members also have the rare variant. None of them died of SIDS or even had heart disease. They concluded perhaps phenotyping still matters, i.e. meet your patient. Not a bad idea. But the truth is, we're really trained to be Eeyore. We get these diagnoses back and we go, oh, I'm sorry. As opposed to telling these moms, congratulations, what's your baby's name? I love getting to ask that. But that's not how we're trained. We say, I'm sorry, and then we start listing the problems of every known thing that could possibly go wrong. I had one mom, her little one had Down syndrome. This was early, back when I had just started as an attending. We had become friends, and she came back to the unit and she says, you doctors, you knew every bad thing, every complication that could possibly go wrong to tell me. Not one of you told me how much like my other children she would be. She was exactly right. And I changed how I was speaking with parents. We really are a cup half empty sort of gang. So prenatal testing, it does not necessarily lead to diagnostic or prognostic certainty. It's a good thing my mom couldn't tell by my fetal ultrasound what a pain in the butt, stubborn thing I would be. Who would have signed up? And yet we assign a diagnosis as if that counteracts the fact that the first diagnosis is, it's a baby. And then we offer death, when we don't even know the spectrum of disease and how much or how little this child's going to be affected. Once again, Johnson, in that article in New England Journal, goes on to say, there is a collective fiction that screening can improve fetuses' health, and a collective silence regarding the fact that a positive screening result could eventually lead to a decision to abort. We need to stop and ask, why are we getting this information? Many of our families arrive with very solid values. Some of them find them in the encounter along the way. But perhaps before we order the next set of tests, we need to be able to stop and ask, what are we going to do with this information? Because if it's a family that's going to value this baby's life no matter what, as one mom said, why would you rob me of my pregnancy? That's exactly what's been happened with this genetic testing that I didn't even know I was getting. So what happens after the prenatal testing? What are the effects to the parents? Let me show you. This is Luke. Luke had abnormal findings on his 20-week ultrasound. He had congenital heart disease. He was very small. Looked like there was some neurologic abnormalities potential. And what the parents were told is that while they didn't have a specific diagnosis, the situation was absolutely hopeless. They were guaranteed that our son's life would cause him and our family difficulty and great suffering. And by the way, I've had other families tell me that they were told, if you don't abort your baby, it's likely you're going to divorce. In so many ways, you can't make this up. So here's Luke and his mom and dad. So basically, the harmful and coercive effects of the grim misinformation our family received could have led to his termination had we not been completely committed to his life and continued to seek answers and means of supporting him. Our son did pass away at 1 month old from complications related to prematurity and infection, but the 4 weeks we had with him remained the most sacred, treasured time of our life. I shudder to think how differently it could have ended had we accepted intentionally harming our child. These folks were traumatized. SAMHSA defines trauma by the 3 E's: an event, which is the result of the circumstances, the experience, it's usually physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and the effects are lasting. Consequences of mental, physical, social, emotional, all of this is kind of taken offline. The American Psychiatric Association defines trauma this way: sudden and unexpected, high-intensity panic and or helplessness, and the responses of numb, detachment, overwhelmed, hyperarousal, anger, all of this is kind of out of control. The parents will tell you that diagnosis day, it was like I've heard car crash, train wreck, life stopped as they knew it. And the trauma and the shock of that moment was just nothing that they were remotely prepared for. Literature actually shows that's true. That fight or flight response that happens when we're traumatized, very good for escaping saber-toothed tigers, not so good for medical decision making. Because the only thing you can hear is it sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher talking to you, and you can't understand half the words. So in this report, they looked to see, do we have the same issues? What they found is when they interviewed 165 moms and 91 dads, and it was a prospective study, which I found, which was terrific, of all babies who had a prenatal diagnosis, 88% of the moms, 83% of the dads said the communication of the prenatal diagnosis was absolutely traumatic. And there was no correlation between the type of malformation or the degree of trauma. Being told your baby is not okay when out of nowhere, and when it is followed by language of, oh, I'm so sorry. I had one mom who said the technician who was doing her ultrasound literally got so upset she flung the Doppler onto mom's lap and ran out of the room. I'm like, oh, good grief. We have got to do a little better job at still remembering that the first diagnosis is it's a baby and a loved one. They found that communication of the diagnosis was sudden and unexpected. 100% of the moms and 83% of the dads felt numb and didn't know how to respond to the diagnosis, plus the assortment of anger or emotions and all the other issues that you would think go with trauma. There was another study. This one had 81 moms and 69 dads. And this was ultrasound findings of a fetal anomaly. And then they scored the parents on the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale. And the key message that they found was the prenatal diagnosis was associated with higher levels of parental depression and traumatic stuff through pregnancy and after birth. These folks had PTSD. How we deliver this news matters. And it sets us up for what kind of parents we can be in the face of trying to get through this. And then the lethal language, I mean, basically it just destroys all hope. In a case when we don't even really know what the diagnosis will mean, we haven't met the patient. This is just a small study. Oops, go back. But that utterly alone finding is something I keep hearing about. The families are scared to tell anyone. They don't understand the diagnosis, and then they're scared to make their other loved ones sad. Telling grandma, and then they're gonna have to comfort them when they're barely holding it together themselves. So you end up sitting there staring at a wall, and the isolation is awful. Which is why what I get to do now is such an incredible joy to reach across and say, no, we got you. So, newly conceived baby, prenatal diagnosis, and we end up with traumatized parents, hope is smashed, isolated, abandoned. Where the heck did we go wrong? Yes, that is me post-call with my hair straight up, so. Well, I would opine that American cultural ethics, and I think it translates pretty much everywhere, the value of life depends. Is there an, quote, imperfection on however the heck that is defined these days? Is the life wanted? As if wantedness changes the humanity of the person that was just formed. After 25 years and a 50-bed NICU with probably about 600 admissions annually, it's like 14,400 babies or something scary, I've been to a lot of deliveries. Not one was a platypus. It was a human being every single time, whether or not the life was wanted. How far along is the pregnancy? As we've already discussed, we're still trying to get past Roe because it has seeped into the bones of medicine. As opposed to Judeo-Christian ethics, human life is sacred, always. That's where we get to start from, and it changes everything. So the medical reality is I can't fix everything, but I always have a duty to care. Whether or not I can heal or fix doesn't change my obligation to not abandon my patient, this family, whomever. Now, I had the honor back 100 years ago during neonatal fellowship. I did my master's in ethics, and I was part of the group that first brought palliative care into the NICU. But it was always about how do I help someone live, not how do I quickly offer death and abandon them. So palliative care this is from the National Consensus Project, appropriate at any stage of a serious illness. I love this, provided over time, based not on the individual patient's need and not on their prognosis. I don't care whether you're going to live 2 days or 24 years, you deserve to be cared for, with medical excellence combined with compassion. They're offered care in all kinds of settings, focuses on what is important to the patient, the family, and the caregivers, and this is an interdisciplinary endeavor. Now, when we apply it to the babies, it was only in 1982, Dr. Whitfield described for the first time in the literature creating a family room within the NICU, as opposed to in those days it was big bays of babies. And this was somewhere private that they could go play music, gather more than one or two at the bedside, and have a place to be as a family. In 1990, Dr. Mangarten published his attempt to help a family bring a terminally ill baby home. The problem is we weren't set up with hospice yet. And so they had to bring the baby back to the ER, which was a little disconcerting. Luckily, they didn't get stopped by the police en route, but they needed more support than what was going on. Today, with perinatal palliative care, it is still about how do I help this little one live as well as possible for as long as we have that privilege with the pathology that can't currently be healed. Now, sports fans, we live in a culture of death where I watch kids get abandoned, and that's not palliative care. That's just abandonment. And yet, when I looked it up, this is in the Oxford Medical Dictionary, or not medical, just palliative, they said palliative medicine is a medicine or form of medical care that relieves symptoms without dealing with the cause of the condition. Where's medical excellence? Seriously, that is not okay. Dr. Annie Janvier up here, I believe at Sick Kids, has this amazing study where they compared, proving the point that we use palliative care to sometimes get rid of folks, prenatal diagnosis compared to a postnatal diagnosis in kids with trisomy 13 and 18. Check this out. Prenatal diagnosis, only 36% live for less than 1 day. That drops to 1% if you're diagnosed postnatally. They go home, only 47 go home, 87% go home with a postnatal diagnosis. With palliative care, if you got palliative care assigned to you prior to birth, 56% lived for less than a day. Everybody lived if you didn't get palliative care until afterward. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's not okay. So what they found, their conclusions, and by the way, every single one of these families, their goals were the same. They wanted to meet their child and if possible bring the child home. What they found is having a postnatal diagnosis was the independent factor most associated with not surviving. Oops, go back. There is some good news. Just this past July, the AAP actually said that life-sustaining intervention should be offered to trisomy 13 and 18 kids. It is no longer, they said, ethical to deny care just based on your genetic diagnosis. Unfortunately, I kept reading, and it says, it's also, oh, good grief. Shouldn't let me drive this. Morally appropriate to offer comfort care. Dr. Annie Janvier says comfort care is a euphemism for do not offer life-sustaining treatment. You can't have it both ways. This is from one of the moms about the language she actually heard after diagnosis. She said she was told, well, you can either terminate this life that is already doomed to die or allow it to die on its own. Those are your two choices. What actually happened? Well, Emmy was eventually offered perinatal palliative care because she was still alive at 37 weeks gestation. What happened is she lived. She was able to go home on a nasal cannula with an orogastric tube. By the way, she had a diagnosis of trisomy 18. And as her mom says, those doctors were wrong. We got to celebrate with our child and bring her home. I got to tell a different mom whose baby was in the NICU who had a short life. But I looked at her, I said, you succeeded. And she looked at me startled. She was not from much means. And she said, I don't think anyone's ever told me I've succeeded before. How can you say that? I said, because you've loved your child. Your little one knew love every single nanosecond of his life. You succeeded. She sent me the most beautiful thank you card I've ever received. So our lethal language begets lethality. Dr. Wilkinson in this article says there really is actually no agreement on the probability of death that would justify describing a condition as lethal. The problem is lethality obscures rather than aids communication and counseling. I know this breaks every rule of appropriate PowerPoint slides, but humor me. It says at the top here, published outcomes for severe congenital anomalies, and all the usual suspects are there. But check out longest lifespans. 13 months, 10 months, 2.5 years, 5 years, 9 years, 27 years, 30 years, 50 years for one patient with trisomy 18. Good grief. I understand lethality to mean if you get shot, you fall over dead, done. If you're living in months to years and you're calling this a lethal diagnosis, we have a definition problem. And what it really reveals is a quality of life bias. This was, I have to apologize for being a neonatologist. This was a survey of neos. I also found it with obstetricians, but Jacobs did this one. 60% admitted that trisomy 18 is not a lethal condition. Way to go. Some figured out that you can live with it. However, only 16% thought that trisomy 18 was compatible with a meaningful life. That's horrifying. I don't think that there's such a thing as a life not worth living. Not when there's love from a parent and we can help this one live as well as possible. By the way, just to prove the point, that came out in 2016, and in 2016 in JAMA, that was survival of 1 year and 15 years, we knew these babies survived. So having a disability is basically equated with being sick or dying or suffering or defective or deformed or abnormal, as opposed to you can be healthy and have a disability. And we forget about the joy that these folks have in living and how much better off we are for getting to care for them, not to mention having them amongst us. Yes, prenatal testing and diagnosis really are barriers to postnatal life. Okay, take a big breath, you live through the worst of it. We're not just gonna admire the problem, here's what we're doing. Here's Madeline. She was, mom was a nurse. Madeline has anencephaly, and mom was pressured to do a selective termination because she had twins. What her mom tells us is they failed to mention the unique bond she had, the beautiful cherished moments during the pregnancy, and she would tell you this baby was feisty, jumping up and down on her bladder at all sorts of times. This is Madeline, who delivered at 32 weeks and 5 days. Mom reports that she lived for 1 hour and 34 minutes, the most sacred and precious hour of my life. I wouldn't have wanted that removed from her for anything. Because it still goes back to our first diagnosis is, it's a baby. No other diagnosis ever negates diagnosis number 1. So, what is option 3? How do we support them? Caring to life, caring as far as we get in the pregnancy, presuming mom and baby are safe, but we work with planning ahead. And we talk about what will we do if there is a stillbirth, if there are signs and symptoms that, gosh, this might be a life that has a limited lifespan. But we talk about evaluate and stabilize. And that's the goal. How do we let the baby decide for us? All of them deserve to be evaluated and stabilized. And we talk about, here's what responding to treatment looks like. And then we go this way. Here's what not responding. And then we go this way. But at no point does that mean, nope, I'm done. How do we care well for each other, whether or not we have the ability to heal? It involves trauma-informed care. So during the pregnancy, what I get to do is try to provide connection, a willingness to run into the problem. You know, when people are in the midst of a crisis, it's easy to run away. Sitting with someone who's in that sort of terror and tears isn't easy. And yet, those phone calls are phenomenal when I get to walk through with someone and once again start the conversation with, do you have a name yet? And they're usually, that brings on the tears because they're so excited someone acknowledged the reality of this child. It means getting through the trauma means safety, sacrificial listening, sitting there in collaboration and encouragement and mercy, because everyone is scared. What am I gonna do? I don't know how to take care. What if the baby needs to be on a ventilator? I don't know how to do this, it's not even available. Stop. We're gonna try to go through this one step at a time. And we do know from the literature that mom's mental health is better when they are not made to be complicit in their own baby's demise. So with trauma-informed care, aiding connection and safety, it resolves that fight or flight response so that the parents can then regain their ability to advocate for their child, as opposed to that numb feeling that we heard about from the actual literature. It's regaining parental agency. It just is allowing them to be mom and dad. Resolving uncertainty is part of this process. One team. We try to invite the entire medical team onto the same playing field. And we'll write up a birth plan, which is really God's irony, because I used to hate birth plans, because usually it meant the longer the birth plan, the less likely I was going to be able to do anything with it. So now I get to write a plan that says, thank you for caring for us. My baby's name is Lydia, and we are already in love with her. So we would like some help. And we talk about we are not in denial, but we want you to come with us, and you have permission to not offer us an abortion ever again. And the number of physicians that are like relieved to know that they don't have to do that, because it is a tenet of ACOG. So it's not about sowing any kind of rough feelings. This is about help. Everyone on the same side. Reducing knowledge gaps. Most of the parents look at us like, I have never heard of trisomy 18 or half the words you're using. What does that mean? And so talking with them more than once, because when you're traumatized in a crisis, you can't hear anything. So being able to sit very quietly. And also admit, here's the part I don't know. I don't know, especially if it's a screening test, I don't know, the accuracy might be pretty bad. So let's see what the ultrasounds say. Are there other reasons to suspect that? One of my recent moms, she really just wanted a gender reveal because she was 39 years old, so she was advanced maternal age. We really have to get rid of that. It's just wrong. Anyway, I was old for all my babies. Anyway, she just wanted to know if it was a boy or girl, and it came back, the NIPT test, which she didn't really understand what was going to happen. It was negative for 21, 13, and 18, but they actually treated it, and this is completely, it's, okay, NIPT is not FDA approved as it is. They also then went on to use it like a whole genome and said, you've got a large duplication on the arm of 13, so this means certain disaster. Her baby had a normal ultrasound at that point. By the time I got her, she's like, what do I do? What is it? I said, you don't have to do anything. She just delivered recently, the most beautiful little redhead. She does have a cleft lip and palate, but when they did genetics actually on her, what the doctors all said is, we don't know what this means. This little girl came out of the NICU in less than 24 hours. She pulled every lead off her body. All her IVs are out. She has an opinion about everything. I'm like, Mom is a redhead, so's the little girl. And she's fabulous. We don't know so much from genetic tests that we then offer this doom and gloom. So we build positive relationships, discover supportive communities. Spina bifida has incredible associations. Lots and lots of these diagnoses have groups to turn to that have lots of helpful things of how do you live with this, and reassure them that there's living with this. It's not just miserable. One of the things that we do at the organization I founded, Navigating Fetal Concerns, is we give them permission to embrace the pregnancy. And we send them gift boxes. One mom said, this is like the shower I was afraid to have because I didn't know if my baby would live. And we intentionally, we've got volunteers who knit blankets and all kinds of amazing things, and we make cards for them. One of the dads in tears was like, this gave me permission to tell my parents about the baby. So we get to give them these incredible, wonderful gift boxes. And sometimes we also know that it might be something that they're buried in. So we give them an emergency baptism kit. And the ladies who do smocking, they make these beautiful gowns that the babies can wear. And we give them 2 blankets, making sure they've got one to hold on to as well as one to keep with the baby. So gifts, choosing a name, helping them share the pregnancy news. And so this is me. We have a button that you can push if you're a patient. We also have a button that says if you are a medical professional, I don't care if you're a medical professional, if you're just interested and you want to talk to me, this gets through to me. And you can find me, and I am happy to consult, because honestly, I've met wonderful, supportive, life-affirming doctors, but I couldn't have done this when I was a full-time neonatologist. There wasn't enough hours in the day. I meet with these moms weekly. We text each other lots and lots. I want to be supportive because you're trying to also run a busy practice. And sometimes there's not enough minutes. So what we do is we serve the parents who receive an abnormal prenatal diagnosis. We do kind of a needs assessment and develop, we first of all determine if they want to carry their baby. I do tell, depending on how this goes, I will not attend an abortion with you. Most of the people who are finding me are looking for hope, and I haven't had that, but I do have them, I make them aware that that's not somewhere I can go. This is all about honesty, and by the way, it's research informed. We don't pretend to stick our head in the sand. What is the diagnosis that we think we know? What does this mean? But also, what do we not know? And no matter what, I'm not going to abandon you. We followed these folks for a year after birth or delivery. And it's the parents, one remarked, it's so amazing to get a card that's addressed to Jeremiah's mom and dad. When he died a couple months ago, and someone remembers his name. So it's about extending the medical services and the community services and collaboration. We encourage parents to reach out to, if they have a faith community and they're trying to juggle doctor's appointments and other kids, meals, getting them meal trains. What else do you need? One thing I have learned, if there's a meal train, have people bring extra meals in a disposable container. This one family ended up with like 16 Pyrex dishes, and they didn't know who to return them to. And then they had to do all the dishes. They're like, I don't want it. So yeah, no, disposable stuff, things that I learned. What Navigating Fetal Concerns does is accompany parents with trauma-informed care, recognizing the baby's inherent value. And the goal is really to assist, not hinder, the healthcare professionals. Because even on a journey no one would choose, love exists. Thanks, you guys.